Hello, and welcome to Superhero Ethics. Today we are taking a trip down the Missouri River to the Ozark area of Missouri. We are talking about all sorts of crazy family drama. We're talking about how do you ethically money launder. And we're talking about, is there any way to find a good guy in this show? All that and more right after this commercial we have no control over. Welcome back, everyone. Once again, I'm Matthew. I'm your host. And I'm joined today by a special guest, Ashley Coffin. For those of you who are MCU fans, Ashley has been a guest on the MCU cast and has also been a pretty regular contributor to their chat groups and the like. She and I got to know each other a lot through those groups, and I recently discovered we have a mutual love of the TV show Ozark, which, granted, is a little bit outside of the superhero comic book genre, but certainly is a interesting TV show that was just had a new season. And a lot of us I know love to binge it, and certainly raises a lot of pretty interesting questions. So, Ashley, I'm glad to have you with us today. How you doing?
Thanks so much for having me. Great. Things are great. How are you doing?
Not bad, not bad. It was fun to dive into this because we started talking when we were both binging it on Netflix, and I think at one point I was a little ahead and you were a little ahead.
Yeah.
And then I realized there was so much just from season 3 to dive into. But then, to get ready for today, I went back and I tried to kind of remind myself of things. And so I went and reread, the Wikipedia articles for each episode that's come before. Mm-hmm. And wow, it made me forget, just what an incredible roller coaster this show has been of, twists and turns. And in some ways, I kind of think of it a bit as a comic book because this is not superhero-y by any means, but this is definitely pulp fiction. You know, this is to me, the epitome of
storyboards,
trash TV, you know?
Yeah. It's it plays out in storyboards. It's crazy. And I did the same thing. I went and we rewatched breakdowns on YouTube.
Oh, nice.
Because I feel like when you binge something and then you think about sometimes that's not the best way to get the information from it, but we're all home and I started watching that show and I couldn't turn it off.
Yeah.
And so the refresh was very good. And you're just like, oh man, a whole lot of stuff happened.
Got it. Yeah. No, I get that. So what do you love about the show? Let's kind of start just in general. What's your take on the show and what do you like about it?
What I love about what they did with this show is every other show that's like this, the families are involved and the main character's always trying to figure out how to juggle everything. Where in this, it's from episode 1, the family's involved and this is how we're going to move forward. And you would think that it would be the better way to handle things. And sometimes it is, but from watching Breaking Bad and stuff, you have to. There's no other way to do this and have it work out and not have your whole family know. So I couldn't wait to see what they were going to do with that kind of plot.
Yeah. I think it's interesting when, I think one of the things that our show often does, this podcast, is, it's called Superhero Ethics. We're talking about people who are trying to be heroes. And to me, there's something that's kind of interesting about when you start in a world where clearly no one is an actual hero. Everyone is trying to do the best they can in pretty detestable situations, and that I think you have people who are trying to be heroic, definitely, and are trying to find the way to do the right thing. But it all kind of starts with a number of people who've made some pretty awful decisions.
Right.
So let me just kind of give a brief summary, if I can, for those who haven't seen the show, The Ozark, and who want to see it, or who want to be part of this conversation in general. But I will say, we're going to probably spoil everything from all 3 seasons, focusing mostly on this last season, but just kind of going over some basic details. So here's my kind of quick summary of a huge plot, but tell me what I leave out. So Marty and Wendy Bird live with their children, Charlotte and Jonah, in Chicago. And Marty seems to be living a pretty kind of normal humdrum life as an accountant until we find out that he is actually laundering money on behalf of the Navarro drug cartel from Mexico. And we find out as the show goes on that at first it seems like just his partner was doing it, but that he's been an active part of it too, that his wife Wendy has known about it for some time. And when the show starts, it turns out that partner was skimming money from the cartel. They find out, they kill him, and place Marty in a situation where he's got to go on the run. And he basically decides that he can go down to this town of, I think it's called Osage Lake. I forget how it's pronounced. But it's in the Ozarks region of Missouri, where it's kind of a vacation area, but for kind of like, I don't know what the politically correct term for white trash is, but it's definitely like that. I want to find a better term, but it's that community, and I think a lot of what the show is about is the classism between the two.
It's where the dusty white people go to vacation.
Yeah, exactly. So then the show is about him attempting to, basically get out from under the thumb of the drug cartel and launder enough money to get them to leave him alone. And I think kind of both it and Breaking Bad share the basic idea of a person who thinks they can kind of make a one-time deal with the devil and get away with it. But that what both shows are really about is that every time you try to figure one thing out, you have to go a little bit deeper and have to go a little bit more into the ethical gray areas or into real kind of wrong behavior. And that it just is a cycle that's always going to get further down and further down. And I think, did you also watch the show Sons of Anarchy?
I did.
Yeah, fantastic show, utter pulp, utter eye candy, but so good. But also about, I think, the same kind of idea. And so along the way they meet up with a family of people called the Langmores, one of whom Ruth, who's very much a local resident, and I think very easily quickly judged as just a dumb hick, but proves to have an incredible intelligence and cunning and a lot of loyalty.
She's my favorite.
Yeah. She becomes kind of part of the family and helps them out a lot. There's a lot, they wind up owning a casino. There's lots of sort of going back and forth with the cartel and what they're going to do. And then eventually in this most recent season, there's continued fights with the cartel, including with this lawyer, Helen, who's kind of the person representing the cartel. And by the end of the season, there's been a brother of Wendy's who has had to be killed because he couldn't be relied on. Ruth has decided to kind of break ties with the family, in large part because she was in love with Ben, the brother. And the Birds have to travel with Helen down to Mexico to meet with the head of the Navarro cartel, thinking that they're about to be killed. And it turns out that Helen is the one who is killed. And we literally end with, Helen's blood on our two heroes. And I think a really symbolic shot. Did I kind of get the gist of what we're going on here?
Yeah. Yeah. Because there's so many little side plots to dive into for the wise, and that's when you get to meet new characters. But as a whole, good job.
Yeah. There you go. Yeah, so I think kind of to me, some of the most interesting questions are here. And let's just kind of start with, like, what's your take on how this show explores that idea of, like, once you kind of start making the deal with the devil, you can never get out?
It's so many characters. Because it's like if you start with Ruth ends up suffering terribly through all this. Yeah. She kills her uncle. They have her father killed, which is kind of that's okay. He sucked, but still. And then Ben, and it was like if Ruth was introduced into the show because her and her family kind of figured out that Marty had money because they were hiding out in a hotel when they got to Ozark.
Right.
And they robbed him. So, you could kind of start like, if she had never done that, where would she, all these horrible things that have happened to her, but she needs to, look and be like, I got myself into this because I decided to start this plan to rob them. And then I was going to murder Marty.
Right.
And, she sees, starts to change when she starts to get to know him. She sees the importance of learning how to launder. Mm-hmm. And then makes the decision to kill her uncles. It's both of them, right? Both were her uncles, right?
Yeah, well, it's in part because they're going to try and kill Marty, but also frame her
Marty
for it. So yeah, she's kind of in a real no-win scenario. And I think that's one of the things I like most about the show is how often it puts a character in a situation where the terrible thing they have to do is because, they have to do something terrible because every other option is worse.
Yes.
Like the number of times where Ruth has to, and one thing I think is interesting is that every one of the characters in this show seems to be at least trying to believe that they are trying to be like, do the right thing for everybody else. That Ruth is trying to protect her younger cousins, and as well as herself. Marty is trying to protect his family. But it gets into a lot of questions of like how much of that is self-interest versus how much of is actually being like, caring for others.
Right. And in these kind of situations, you have to either shut it down and not kind of care for people, which I feel like throughout the seasons, Marty starts to become very cold, very like he doesn't have emotions towards things anymore.
Right.
But then right at the very end, he chooses to help Rachel, who was a bartender at one of the bars that he took over to start laundering. And she stole, what, $100,000 from him?
Yeah.
Yeah. And even though he's making these decisions and people are dying because of their decisions, he'll still find it deep down in there like, I'm still a person, you know, and I care about these people and I still care. And it's, you don't get a lot of it, but like the moments when they realize like, oh my God, what am I doing? What have I done?
Well, one thing I think, and here's where I think Marty breaks a little bit with Walter White from Breaking Bad. Mm-hmm. Marty seems to be primarily motivated by guilt, at least for a lot of the first 2 seasons and somewhat the third, in that he knows that all of this started because of his decision to launder money for the drug cartel, and him believing that he could get, you know, that there's that old expression that I love, like, you know, you can't get a little bit pregnant. You know, you're sort of like, you're in or you're out. And I think that that's really kind of where he sits, is that he believes that, you know, or at least before the show started, he thought he could launder money but keep his hands clean, make some real money. And I think the part of what's happening is, the people what he hates seeing is the collateral damage that everything is doing around him. And I think that's another theme that also really explores, is who are the people who see that and who are the people who don't. Because I think that really, there's a family called the Snells who are, again, they're the kind of like, they're involved in the drug business, but they're again portrayed as like the locals. And they have a lot of intelligence, but also a huge amount of pride. And they speak with the thick accents in ways that I think kind of set off the classism of our main characters and are meant, I think, to make us as the audience challenge that as well. But it seems like they're not motivated by that guilt. They have a much they don't care about the collateral damage of the things that they do the way that Marty does.
It's where you get to your people. They ran poppy fields and they were selling heroin, and they blew away one of their top people, right? What did that guy do? I can't remember. They're
and I think we can get too lost. We go too deep in details, but no. But I think the basic.
But like they're kind of like built for it, where Marty's not. They love it. Darlene loves it. Yeah, and Marty, he's more human than that. And I feel like a lot of that consequence stuff is when you go to the who's the preacher, Mason? Yeah. Like that's when things changed, I feel like, in the show for Marty and Wendy. Yeah. After what happened with that family, because, Marty got if you go back morally, Marty got that whole family killed.
Yeah. I mean, here what happens is Marty is trying to find ways to launder money, and he finds out about a church that's meeting as just, boats on the water. And he tries to say, okay, can I, what would it mean? Could I convince this pastor to build a new church? Because the idea is that church construction, it's very easy to launder money because, again, contractors' fees can get overpaid and all this kind of stuff. And then it winds up that it gets into a larger situation where that whole family of the pastor and his family are all just kind of decimated. And so I kind of feel like in some ways that to me is Marty's original sin almost, that he keeps carrying that through. We'll get into each character in specific, but just kind of talking about the larger issues. What's your take on the way this kind of the issue of class kind of plays out in this show, and the way it's really kind of set up about, the local hicks, and again, I'm using that term kind of ironically, but that's, I think, the way the people in the show see it, versus the city folk like Marty and Wendy and then Helen and other folks like that.
Yeah, when you get when a Helen who comes in, who already, a Helen and a Wendy, people who are educated, work with Congress, lawyers, they're going to think that they're better and smarter than everybody else, which will lead to faults in your planning, because it is never good to underestimate people. Just because someone has an accent doesn't mean they're stupid. Look at Ruth. Right. And with Darlene, I mean, when they were doing the deals with Del, all it took was for him to call her a redneck, and she shot him in the face.
Yeah, and that was after she said some pretty insulting things about him being Mexican.
Yeah.
I kind of feel like, to me, the thing that I think separates Ruth and Darlene, and this is something I think about a lot, is It's funny. Ashley, you and I are really getting to know each other because we're playing a Dungeons and Dragons campaign together. And
the best.
It's such a fun campaign. Huge shout out to Jeff Randall, who's running it from the
Bestia
from the MCU campaign, the MCU cast. But to me, one thing I love about the Dungeons and Dragons idea is that it separates the idea of intelligence from wisdom, and intelligence, I think, is a lot about book learning, and it's about your ability to sort of process book learning and to, kind of do that kind of thing. Wisdom is more about cunning. And I think part of what the show is highlighting is that a lot of the folks from the Ozark area might not have very high intelligence, but they have very high wisdom. But what I think Darlene and Ruth are different is that, and this is kind of an intelligence thing, Ruth is able to say, I can figure stuff out. I'm smart, but there's things that I don't know. And so she's constantly asking Marty and others, explain to me how this works. Explain to me how this works. Darlene, I think, is the opposite. Darlene is, I know how things work in my corner of the world, and I don't care that everyone else wants to be different. I'm just going to be set in my ways and damn the torpedoes and make life impossible for everyone else.
Darlene's wild card.
Yeah, very much so. Very much so.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. And it's like that the way that Wendy would try to interact with the people in the town when they were trying to buy their businesses to launder and nobody wanted anything to do with them. And in her mind, she's like, well, why wouldn't you? I have this great plan.
Yeah.
You're going to make a ton of money. And they're like, we're not buying you shit. Like, you know what I mean? And they were shocked when it was such a pushback and it was hard for them to get this started. And it's like, you can't underestimate people.
Yeah. We've talked before on this show, and this is more about kind of like supervillains and stuff, but this idea of intellectual fascism, kind of this idea of like, I am smarter, I am right, so I should do what's right. Like, have you seen Watchmen, especially the new
Yes.
Like, to me, Ozymandias is that exact idea. He is, I know what's right. And to me, Wendy is exactly the same. She's very much in that.
That's what I was.
Go ahead. Yeah.
I was going to be like, Wendy broke bad by the time we got there. And she's exactly like that. Even when she, says to Marty after she makes major decisions that affect everyone, like, I didn't have time to argue. And it's like, that's where the dynamic of a family working together to keep all of this stuff in control starts to fail, is when everybody starts lying or just doing things without telling anybody. And that's when things start to fall apart.
Right.
And it's always because somebody thinks that they know best.
Yeah, it's that they know best and they don't have to be accountable to anyone, which is why I'm Team Tony, by the way. But that's a whole other story. But yeah, I think that's all very true. And I think with Wendy, we really see this especially play out with the class issue. Because as you said, she really has a sense of like, I know best, and and I think this is something that can become a real danger, both like from an individual, but also from like a country or from any kind of institution, where you think, I know what's best for someone, and so it's okay for me to hurt this person even to get them to go along with it, because in the long run it's going to be what's best for them.
I know it'll be better for them in the end.
Exactly.
Do you?
Yeah. and I mean, to me, and I think that's what we see in this most recent season, especially. She's convinced that she gets this whole idea of moving into legitimate business. I kind of want to make her go watch the Godfather movies and realize why this doesn't really work.
Doesn't work.
Yeah, but her idea is like, if she can create a legitimate business for the Navarros, then that will make them safe.
And it was smart of her. She was also, her underlying thing with that was to convince him it was a way to help protect his children. She was very smart with laying the bricks for what she was planning to do.
Right. She's very, and part of the idea is that because as the show happens, the Navarro clan is in the middle of a drug war with another cartel, and so he wants to keep his kids safe. He wants to be able to have a legitimate business that can't be taken away. But what I think is most interesting is she starts identifying other businesses that she thinks like it would be in their best interest to sell to her. And when they can't be convinced, she not only just gets angry, but she starts thinking it's okay to do pretty horrible things to them to force them to sell. And it's it's to me, it's such an interesting ethical journey, because it's the thing I think, honestly, that I think so many villains do, where they say to themselves, I know what's best, and I know that my plan is best. And so if someone gets in my way, it's okay to hurt them because they're in the way of, what the world needs.
Right. Mm-hmm. And yeah, her and Helen. And it's hard with this kind of show because our villains are our heroes. So when her and Helen are working together well and everything's going good and they make their plans to how to get these people to sell. Like, I love that.
Yeah.
I'm loving it. I'm like, wait a minute. I don't know how I feel. She's doing, this is really horrible, but it's awesome at the same time. The show.
Yeah. I mean, it's very much a kind of like Breaking Bad. It's kind of why it's fun to talk about on a show like this. It's very much a kind of guilty pleasure because it's, there is no hero. There is no good guy. And I think the story is told in a way that we wind up rooting for Marty and for Helen, not for Helen, and Wendy. But you're also sort of figure like, couldn't you also make a TV show called The Langmores?
Oh yeah, 100%.
And that Marty and Helen and Wendy would be 100% the bad guys in this story. So yeah, let's talk about each character individually. So Marty, first of all, and we've kind of gotten a lot of somewhat into him already. He's someone who he sees himself as kind of the head of this whole plot, the head of this whole idea. What's your take on his ethical journey, especially in this last season, where he really goes through a lot?
Was he taken in this last season, or was that season 2?
Yeah, he so to give kind of an idea of his arc, he really stands against Wendy and her plans to get the casino, buy this other casino. At one point, he actually she's trying to sabotage the deal one way. He tries to sabotage the deal another way, which involves actually doing damage to a rival casino.
Yeah,
and then
I want to unpack this whole thing a bit because that part right there is for Marty's part. I have big problems with.
Yeah, so let's actually start right there. So, and just kind of summarize. So, Wendy has a casino she wants to buy, and part of her justification is the casino is getting killed by this rival casino. And so no one will loan them money to help support them because they all see them as a terrible risk. Wendy tries to put incredible financial pressure on them. She has them just about ready to sell, at which point Marty makes a deal with his buddies in the mob to basically destroy part of the rival casino. So now with the rival casino out, the first casino's business does much better, and they now don't need the loan or the help from Wendy's group. Right. And eventually they do wind up being forced to make the deal, but that's sort of Marty's interfering. So yeah, what's your take on what he does there?
So, they're several months into dealing with the cartel. Marty has seen his friends killed in front of him. When they made the deal, Del cut someone's eyes right out in front of him when he started to agree to lauder. So it's what these people are like.
Yeah.
Why would you ever put your wife in a bad situation where they could just kill her? You made a really bad choice to try to block this when she's on a timeline and how important it is.
Right.
And sure, she's gone full Heisenberg at this point. But in the end, do you want your family to live? So the fact that he got the mob involved to go against the cartel and do that, I thought that was ridiculous.
Yeah. And I think part of it goes to, you were saying why would you do this to your wife? I think part of it, and this season is where this changes, but for a lot of the season, Marty doesn't treat we found out earlier that she was cheating on him, and I don't I am very much not of the so therefore she's the evil one. I think
No.
Infidelity comes out of very complicated situations, and that he was in large part he had a lot to do with. But basically, I feel like we got to a point where if they were in a normal situation, he would have filed for divorce, and I think that in some ways he's seeing her as his business partner, who's going behind his back against what he did, kind of like what his business partner did at the start of the show. So I think I have some sympathy for him, but I think you're right. I think this is a situation that I'm in all the time with this show where I understand why a character wants to do the really dumb thing they're doing, but it just still seems so dumb. And I agree with you.
I know.
Wendy shouldn't have done it, but once she does, he's a total idiot for doing it as well.
Yeah, and it's just like how you had said, his partner did it, and so he's just kind of finally, I agree he needed to push back a little bit, but it's look at what happened to your partner. You have to be smarter. It's, you're not just dealing with anybody. That move could have gotten your whole family killed.
Yeah, I think that's true. And so later in the season, he winds up getting kidnapped by the Navarro cartel. what's the name of the guy who's the head of the cartel? Do you remember? I think, is he just Omar? Thank you. Yeah, Omar Navarro. Mm-hmm. And he basically, like, he's there for a couple days, and then in part it's a way to kind of test if they need him to do the money laundering or if someone else can do it. And there's a whole thing with the FBI, and that he kind of is able to pass the test and get sent back. But he's clearly deeply affected by it, though he's not willing to talk about it. And I think he then becomes a little bit more kind of less risk averse and more willing to kind of take chances. And he spends a lot of the rest of the show, he spends most of this season trying to decide whether or not he's going to turn himself into the FBI. And part of his thinking is, can he make a deal where it will get him out from under and will get his family protected?
Right.
And I think it's an interesting thing of, like, how much is he ever actually seriously considering it versus how much is he doing it to string along the FBI agent to get her under control? What's your take on that? Do you think there were times where he really meant it, or was he always just playing a game?
No, I think there was a couple points when he was very serious about it. Because when the way Wendy was moving, she was going to get everybody killed. Yeah. So if he could give himself up at any point where he would go away and everybody else would be safe, he would do it. But I also feel like he knows kind of deep down that you're never really safe from the cartel. And he's starting at this point to get that whole, once you're in, there's no getting out.
Yeah.
So, they have people in the FBI.
Yeah.
And
yeah, I think that's definitely true. And I think it's also, like, one of the things I think I think it's meant to be coincidental, but certainly it I think affects Marty very deeply is he has literally just said to the FBI agent that he'll take the deal. And then he sort of, like, walks away to kind of start getting things lined up. And that's when the people from the cartel grab him. And my sense is that's what really shifts for him, is because that's when he realizes the FBI can't ever really keep him safe.
Yeah, I agree 100%.
Yeah, so anything else on kind of Marty's journey with all this? Or you want to go to the next character?
Let's go to the next character.
So let's talk about Wendy, who I know you had some pretty strong feelings about when we were chatting during the season. She also goes on quite a journey. I think this is the one where she really is coming into her own a lot more, but also a lot more into, as we said, kind of the, like, I know best, and so I get to make the decisions. She also winds up being faced with an incredibly hard decision where, and to kind of give a quick summary, her brother is portrayed as being severely mentally ill, to a point where he often makes very self-destructive decisions that can also be very harmful to everyone around him. In large part based on whether or not he's taking his medication. And at one point, he comes to stay with her, and he's doing well, but he, among other things, while he's doing well, he sort of discovers part of what's going on, and the family, they bring him into the family secrets and all the business. Him and Ruth...
Who didn't they tell?
Yeah.
Who didn't they tell?
They're not good at the secrecy thing. Him and Ruth start getting involved, and Wendy really strongly encourages Ruth not to get involved with him. Ruth says, like, kind of to hell with that. They get involved. They go to bed together, and he has the problem that can happen with a lot of mental illness medications, that it can affect sexual performance. And he gets kind of very deeply embarrassed by it, and then says, like, okay, I'm going to stop taking the medication in order to, be able to have a sex life with Ruth. And then he pretty quickly spirals, goes off the deep end, and winds up, they try a number of ways to try and get him back under control. He gets into trouble. He gets into legal trouble. Helen, the drug cartel lawyer, kind of has to help him out. And as a result, he winds up getting committed to a mental institution. Ruth breaks him out, and then he winds up, while still kind of, not being in treatment or under medication, really kind of having a snap moment where he goes to Helen, this drug cartel's lawyer, and tells her kid all the secrets about what Helen does. And in so doing, kind of basically, like, shows the Navarro clan that he can't be trusted, and puts Wendy and Marty in a situation where they realize, like, they can't keep him safe and they have to give him up. And eventually Helen tries to, go on the run with him and keep him safe, but he keeps doing things that show that he's not going to be able to, he calls Helen to, like...
He calls her.
Yeah, and...
He goes to see Ruth at the casino when everybody's, the cartel guys are looking for him. every time they tell him not to do something, he does the opposite because, as the theme, he thinks he's trying to help. He's trying to make things better.
Yeah. I think that's very true. And so eventually, in a real heartbreaking and very hard to watch scene, Wendy realizes she can't save him, and they go to this diner and have a kind of really nice conversation. And you later realize that she has, told the cartel people that this is where he will be. And she drives away and leaves him knowing that, his death has come for him. So what's your kind of take on Wendy's decisions here?
When it comes down to it, though, I feel like she didn't have any other choice.
Yeah.
They got him into the mental institution. If he would have gotten back on his medication, she actually did know best in this point because that is her brother and she's been dealing with it her entire life. So for Ruth to have gone behind her back and break him out, Ruth kind of has a hand in it too. But it was either going to be him getting himself killed in front of the family, getting the family killed. It almost seemed like the most humane way to do it. While keeping her family safe, which was really that's like the end game. So yeah. I didn't see any other way for her to get out of that.
Yeah, I really wrestled with this one, and I'll some full disclosure, and I've talked about this before on the podcast, but for those who haven't heard it, I am someone who has dealt with very bad mental illness in the past. I've been, it is happily a part of my life that is a chapter that's quite closed, but I was able to really relate to Ben in a lot of ways, not in for me, it was always turned much more inward than outward. Well, mostly, not entirely. But happily, I also never had, drug family secrets to get engaged in. But I'm always hesitant when shows like this cover issues of mental illness because I think that there's a lot of ways that it can be done in kind of a pulp-like way. And I think part of me was frustrated with how the mental institution was presented because I think the way the story was told. There's this scene of just like Ben wailing and begging, don't lock me up, don't lock me up, it will kill me. And there's a part of me that just really wrestled with that because mental health institutions in this country are not the best by any means, and I'm guessing in rural Missouri especially are probably not that good. But I do feel like they did the absolute best they could. It was the police put them in a very hard situation, and I think the way the show plays out is Ruth breaks him out because I feel like she sort of feels like that's what she has to do because he's basically been sentenced to death. When you're right, I feel
he broke her when she went to visit him. He's hysterically crying and she's not used to dealing with, somebody, who has these issues. So she doesn't know. Yeah. And
we'll get to Ruth in a second for sure because she's an important part of it. But I feel like for him, for Wendy, I hate watching it, and I kind of wish the show had written it a little bit differently to be a little more sympathetic. But I think you're right, and it's the, it's almost sort of that I think you kind of were saying this before. We're now at decision number 5, and is decision number 5 probably the best thing that Wendy could have done? Absolutely. But I also and so I feel like in some ways, I don't think Wendy's responsible for her brother's death because of what she did. But Wendy also, she decided to start down that whole decision tree by saying it was okay for Marty to start laundering money. And in the regard to which, this is a natural consequence of that. Part of what her decision was
she allowed him to stay.
Yeah.
Marty asked him to leave. They both asked him to leave. They had one sweet bro-sis conversation on the bed, and she's like, I want you to stay. And all of us groaned from around the world while we were watching that episode, no, girl, what are you doing? Oh.
One of the things I think that often drives me crazy in shows like this is where someone says, look, I'm going to take this risk because I'm confident that it won't go bad. And I often think, if you do that, you have to be responsible for when it goes bad. And both, you're right, when she lets the brother stay, but even going much further back, this was a foreseeable consequence of getting involved with money laundering, getting involved in something very shady when you have a brother who's a potential loose cannon,
she didn't protect him from the get-go, which would have been as much as it would have been hard for her, she needed to tell him, get out of here. We don't want you here.
Right.
Break his heart to save his life.
Break his heart, or even just, and again, there's no show if this happens, but I think it's what we can judge her for. For her to say to the very beginning to Marty, like, look, I have this brother who I love dearly and is a loose cannon, and I don't want to be involved in anything, illegal because it could tie into him some way. It's that level of forethought that I think none of these characters have. That's so frustrating.
No. Well, it's even like with things going on in the world now when all of a sudden there's this option. And I've always said, I'd be a Wendy in a second. I would go in there and try to be a boss bitch and try to take care of it. Because when people flash money like that in front of you and it's like, you are set for life. You just have to do this. It's, you either jump off the cliff or, it's all in or nothing. And it's hard. It's hard to make that decision.
Yeah. Just yesterday, I recorded a podcast on the TV show Burn Notice, which have you seen?
Mm-mm.
It's fantastic. It's one of my favorite shows, and I think I really want to encourage people to watch it, especially when we're kind of going into a content drought. But one thing we talked about there is because it's all about it's closer to the superhero idea. It's all about super spies, but that in that world you're always having to make a decision of how much can I compromise myself? How much can I do a bad thing for a good end? And I think this is exactly that same thing, because I'm sure even that first time when Marty and Wendy decide to launder money, I forget what it is, but I'm sure that there's some level where they're because we're going to have to pay for the kids' schooling and that they have good intentions, even though I think they come from a very privileged place. But it's, one of the things that I think I'm fascinated by, and I think this show does such a good job illustrating is, once you tell yourself it's okay to cross a line because you're doing it for good purpose, it feels like the next line becomes that much easier and the next line becomes that much easier.
I was just going to agree. I was going to say, her choices in season 2.
Yeah.
Helen told her if she chose to have Cade, Ruth's dad, killed, that it was going to change her.
Right.
And it did. And it changed her in a way that she felt more powerful, I feel like.
Yeah.
And that's when she starts to, really, she's like, I'm in control. I'm doing this. I'm going to meet Navarro and this and that. So maybe something like that happening in season 2. I feel like season 1 Wendy would never have let that happen to her brother.
Yeah, I think it's very true. I think that's, she's both fallen down this pit a little bit. But again, here it's like every time the show shows you someone doing something terrible, it then makes you sympathetic to them, because part of what I also remembered as I was rereading this is a big part of the plot is that she's a person who had to put her political, her literal, she was involved in politics. She had to put her political and her career goals on hold for her husband and for her family. And so there's a part of me that's like, you get it, girl.
You're good at it.
Claim your power.
I like to watch you. Yeah, I like watching you be good at it.
Yeah. So it's one more way that the show just gets so complicated.
It does.
So let's get to Ruth. And Ruth, I think, is my favorite character, and I think you said yours as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
And she really goes on quite a journey. What's your kind of take on Ruth? First of all, what makes you like her so much?
Oh, she's just a little firecracker. She had my heart when she kicked that guy in the nuts and threw him off the top of the boat. And I was like, that's my girl. She's tough. She's smart. She knows it's important to learn, which is so difficult for people who come from a life situation where, her and her family live in 3 trailer parks,
right.
3 trailers. And, most people, she has this will, I'm getting out of this. I'm going to, change my life, and I'm going to learn how to do things, even if it's illegal, to, better myself. And she's good at it.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting because I feel like in some ways she's one of the smartest characters on the show, in part because she does the, like you said, it's hard, I think, for anybody to kind of know what you have to learn. I think it's also really hard when you don't know your own biases. And I feel like she's one of the ones who's most willing to be like, well, this the way I've been taught tells me that this should be a dumb thing, but I'm willing to kind of go beyond that, and she's fiercely loyal to her family, but also willing to cut ties when her family's being horrible. She's willing to kind of stand up for herself. And, I think one of the most interesting parts of all this is how much she's so fiercely I think, again, in part, I think because in many ways she and Marty bond because I think they're both very motivated by guilt. And I think a lot of it is it's a survivor's guilt of, for Marty, it's that he escaped when everyone else he was involved with didn't. For her, it's that she's doing well. She's getting out of her poverty situation. And so when she sees people like her cousin Wyatt who aren't and who are getting into worse situations, it really motivates her to want to try and do better.
Yep. And it's so nice to see characters grow so far from what they were when you meet them in the first episode to, season 3. It's, she, and I love, she tries to be hard, but she does have feelings. Like when Helen went to her and kind of asked her if Marty was needed on a vacation in Mexico, if she could do things, by herself. And she's like, yeah, absolutely. And then it clicked for her that, oh my God, I just might have signed Marty's death warrant. And she went to him and she was hysterically crying. And I love how they built that relationship. Like these people actually care about each other until somewhere in season 2. And we'll get, I just want to say one other thing about Ruth before, and then let's dive into that. The other thing I think, and I think, our mutual friend Matt Carroll from the MCU cast and others would say that I'm a little bit too much of a, kill the rich attitude. But there's a part of me that feels a lot more sympathetic to her than I feel to Marty and Wendy. And it's, to me, it's because of the situations they come from. And what I mean by that is, for me, a person who's living on food stamps and welfare a person who's living in a trailer park in a very difficult economic situation. I actually don't know if she's ever on government support of any kind, but who's, clearly dirt poor. Everyone around her is dirt poor. She has no real sense of her chance to get out of this. When a huge amount of money is waved in front of her face, if she does some morally problematic things, I have a lot of sympathy for her. Marty and Wendy are, comfortably upper middle class. Before they start this embezzling project. And I think and maybe again, paying to send their kids to good colleges is going to be difficult, but I have a lot more, to me, if you say someone from Ruth's position decides to make a bad moral decision to improve her economic situation, it's not forgivable, but it's a lot more understandable to me than someone like Marty and Wendy, where we're doing pretty well, but we want to do much better. Mm-hmm. No, I agree with that. It's interesting, and her dynamic's interesting. How old is she supposed to be on the show? I
think she's supposed to be she starts out maybe 17, 18, and by season 3 she's 20 or 21, but it's not really clear. Okay.
And it's interesting because she's such an interesting character. Where say she wasn't in love with Ben, and he was causing a threat to the family or her family, I could have easily seen her kill him because we can't she is a killer. Mm-hmm. A young age, she's killed a couple people, and it's it's just an interesting part of her character. I think, you see this sweet little, not sweet, but this, cute girl who's smart and she's driven. And then on this other side, she'll kill you.
Hold on a second. I'm just looking this up to see if I can find out how old she is. Okay. So I did a quick look, and Ruth is supposed to be 19 when the show starts. I think actually not that long has passed. I think it's only been, it's been some time. So she's probably 21, 22 by the time we get to this point in the show. And you're right. I feel like the way she's presented, I really appreciate the way that, I like when writers kind of trick me because of my own biases. And I think she was very much presented to be again, that hick girl who doesn't know better. And the way she grows really challenges you, and it just makes her a very sympathetic and interesting character, which I think is why probably the thing I liked least about this season was the turn she made at the end of the season. And here what I mean is her feeling she feels like that they were wrong to treat Ben the way that she did, and also that the birds are. There's a whole other thing where again, we're trying not to over-explain everything, but it's the show's so complicated.
We're doing good. We're doing good.
One of the things that happens is the birds have always had this tense relationship with the Kansas City Mafia because of the the mafia's involvement in organized crime and gambling and things like that. And part of the deal is that the son of the mob leader will be at the casino and having to work with Ruth. And he treats Ruth really badly, and they have a couple of fights. And as you said, she at one point kicks him in the balls and knocks him off the deck.
It's the best.
And they make a deal where both of them are supposed to be untouchable. And a couple of the mob men get killed by the cartel. The son, in a very hot-headed way, blames Ruth for it, although it turns out that he's wrong for it, and arranges for her to really be like kidnapped and tortured and really beaten in, put in the hospital. And she demands that, justice be done. And the birds have to say, like, we can't, he's untouchable. And because of the situation we're in.
Which that seemed like it was a more Wendy driven decision.
Right.
And that was more Marty just kind of like being at that point where he just shrugs and he's like, ugh, whatever.
Yeah.
Whatever you say.
Well,
at this point, which was a huge mistake because this was awful.
Right. And I think so because of that and because of Ben, the show ends with Ruth really kind of having clearly turned on the birds and now being willing to, at least it seems, go and work with the Snells, the Darlene's family.
Well, and it's because Darlene is she's probably in her 60s and she's sleeping with her cousin, taking very good care of him. And Darlene also went and got that justice for Ruth that Wendy and Marty did.
Right.
And I kind of see what she would,
Yeah.
I get it.
Yes, I was going to say, so what's your take on Ruth's decision there? You think she...
Yeah, after Marty did what he did, and then I feel like she is at fault for what happened to Ben, for her part. And I feel like everybody could have handled that last conversation better where Wendy's screaming in her face, this is your fault. You killed him. This is a 20-year-old girl. She's in love with him. Like, let's tone it down and think before we speak, but then we wouldn't have a show.
Yeah.
And Darlene took her shotgun and she shot Frank Jr.'s balls off. If somebody did that for me, I'd be like, okay, maybe this person she's taking care of my cousin. She wants to take care of me. She made it safe for me. Darlene ends up making a deal with the Kansas City mob, and things look like they're working to move forward there. While the stuff with Marty, as far as they knew, they might have been getting shipped off to be killed. Yeah. I don't know. I agree. I mean, I see that as her best case scenario because she lives in a world where she has to take the best case scenarios.
Yeah, it's funny. At first, I was very against the direction Ruth goes in this, and I thought it was just kind of bad writing. But I think, as you talk, I think you're right that because there's a part of me that sort of looked at what the situation the birds were in and thought Ruth was being unreasonable to think that actual revenge could happen. But then I think part of what Darlene shows is that, and this is the problem with the birds, is that they always back down, and that there's an extent to it.
Yes.
Everyone in this show, once you're outside the law, everything always works based on who's willing to make the biggest threat and who's willing to back it up. And on some level, I feel like Darlene has a very kind of damn the torpedoes idea, as does Ruth, which in the long run I think is the wrong thing to do. But in this case, it does get the mob to back down. And so it makes you kind of think, like, why weren't... And, well, I guess here's the best question, is Ruth at one point says, like, you backed down because I'm not really part of the family. If this happened to your actual daughter, you would never have backed down. Do you think that's true?
Oh, 100%.
Okay.
I mean, how fast did Wendy, after she found out what Cade did, or what Ruth's dad did to her daughter, he was killed the next day?
Right.
Was that protecting Ruth or was that protecting Charlotte?
No, I think you're right there. And I guess I think, and here again, it's one of those times where, like, I wonder just how good the writers are. Because I feel like if we're supposed to be on Ruth's side and thinking that she's making the right decision, I have trouble with that. Because I think she's right. The birds didn't protect her as much as she wished they had. But the Snells are certainly not any better, I don't think. But what to me makes sense is, if part of this is her feeling incredibly guilty because she knows she was responsible for Ben's death, not wanting to admit that. And so she's doing that thing that a lot of us do, I think, where she's turning all that anger outwards so that she doesn't have to turn it inward. If that makes sense. Oh,
I agree. 100%.
Yeah. And from that perspective, I think now Ruth's behavior makes a lot more sense to me, because then it's like to stay with the birds would mean to, in some extent, take responsibility for what she did. And I think she can't do that for understandable reasons.
Yeah, and her and Wendy's relationship is pretty much destroyed because Wendy, again, she's not wrong. If they had just waited it out a couple days, let him get back on his medication, maybe he would have calmed down. Maybe he's right. Maybe he would have died in there, but maybe, more likely he would have calmed down, have been put on his meds, and then, they could have gone from there.
Yeah. I think that's, I'm no psychiatrist.
And wasn't it Darlene who got him out of? Darlene did that too. She went to Darlene to help get him out.
Did she? I thought she did entirely on her own, but no, you might be right.
No, I think because Darlene, for some reason, has the sheriff.
Oh, that's right. She has the pull with the sheriff. Yeah.
Yeah, and Darlene bailed Wyatt out of jail.
Right.
So she's been doing a lot of things for the Langhorns, which is smart because she's alone.
Yeah. No, she's definitely made a very conscious effort to pull them to Darlene to rebuild a family that way in a way that's, I think, impressive as well as it's terrifying.
Wild card.
Yeah. No, you're right. And it's again, it's that kind of like, I look at the show and I feel like you could take any of these main characters. I think the Birds and Ruth are portrayed in the most sympathetic light because that's who the show's about. Mm-hmm. But I feel like you could take this show and really tell it from the perspective of any character and make that character seem the most heroic, what I just think is so well done. So yeah, I think Ruth was kind of the last main character we wanted to talk about. One other thing I'll just say, and we can't get too, I don't want to go too deep in it, but I will say that kind of, I think one of the most interesting things the show does is also the kids' perspectives, because clearly, if there's anyone who's kind of like, blameless victims in all this, it's them. But I do love the way that they're not just treating them as innocents. Like, both of these kids are becoming... Do you ever see the TV show Weeds?
Yes.
I love Weeds, and part of what I love is that it lets, little 12-year-old Shane Botwin become a little budding sociopath.
Yeah. And I get, like, Jonah is the best, guy in the chair. They needed him so bad. Mm-hmm. Charlotte can kick rocks.
Yeah.
She makes, whereas Jonah's actually trying to help. Mm-hmm. And we're in this situation. She does literally everything she can to be the worst character on the show. But we'll see what happens with Jonah, because I don't want to jump around too much on it. It's hard. You're right. It's hard. He goes to Helen's house because he thinks Helen's going to kill his parents. So he takes a gun and he's going to kill Helen. And Helen's like, I didn't kill your uncle. Your parents did. So I feel like we're going to go into season 4 where it's like Marty and Wendy versus everybody, because Jonah is not going to be.
Yeah. I think
as cool.
I think Jonah has been fiercely loyal to the family first and foremost. And Charlotte, like you said, has been a lot more kind of on the outs. And yeah, I am very curious to see where Jonah goes, because Jonah now has, I think, and it's not like Helen was being entirely honest. Like, she put them in a situation where they had to kill the brother.
Right.
As well as she was literally in the process of getting Jonah's parents killed when she does that. And I admit there's a part of me that just really wanted Jonah to pull the trigger, even though I know that would have been like
I did too.
Now we have to deal with a 12-year-old murderer, and that's a whole other... I guess he's between like 14 and 15. No, he's like 13, I think.
Yeah.
He is pubescent enough to be very aware of his sister's friend in a bathing suit, but he's still sort of prepubescent enough that, like, well, his attentions aren't really taken seriously, but she also kisses him at the end. Like, it's a kind of like...
Yeah. She was weird. Well, he doesn't have any friends, and they always like would whisper behind his back that they were worried he would end up like Ben. And so when Ben shows up, they have a friendship after Buddy dies. That's his only, friend. And he's like, oh, this is my uncle. People say that I'm a lot like him, and he gets very close to him. So he takes it, he's taking it very hard. And then to find out, this whole family, the whole point of this to make it work was that they were going to do it together and no more lies. And then everybody just starts immediately lying to each other. And I know we wouldn't have a show without the lies, but just stop lying to each other. Just be honest. It's always when the things work the best.
Yeah. No.
And you're just like pulling your hair like, why are you guys just lying? Stop lying.
And again, it's that kind of thing of like, there are so many times where I look at like TV shows and movies and think, if I wish these characters could have healthy relationship dynamics, but if it was, there would be no movie. Or especially because like I think I've joked with people about, like, to me, if Tony and Steve in the MCU had a healthy relationship, it would go, Tony, I think we need some kind of regulation. How about we do this? The Sokovia Accords. Cap says, no, that's far too restrictive. And now Tony and Steve sit down for 2 hours of bureaucratic negotiation to figure out a middle ground. But instead, no, we can't do that. We just go to punchy land.
Well, and everybody else, if I was Cap, I'd be like, well, Tony, we're in trouble because of, this is 80% your fault. I didn't create a super pot, but that's a different cast.
Definitely.
Team Cap.
But we'll definitely get you on there for some time. But yeah, it's that whole dynamic of, if we had healthy relationships, we wouldn't have TV shows and movies. But you do kind of tear out your hair, like you say, just like, can you all just stop lying? Tell each other the truth.
Yeah. Like Marty, what did he do? He bugged her phone and bugged Wendy's phone. And when she calls the cartel knows that her phone's bugged. Like, you can't, how are you making stupid decisions like that? Like, you think she's calling the leader of a cartel and he doesn't have a way to see if the phones are being bugged? Like, the trust, the this, the that, like all the things they're doing to put themselves in more danger. Well, it goes back to exactly what you said. Every decision just makes things worse.
And I think it's just the hubris. Like, both Marty and Helen are convinced that they at the end are smarter than everyone else. And if they come out with a plan, there's a piece that I saw written a while ago, and it was about it was kind of using role playing or video game ideas to apply to kind of like psychology in life. But it's basically about, do you see other people as NPCs or as other player characters? And like, I think both Marty and Wendy are in that they see everyone as NPCs. They think like, I know how this person will act. They'll do what I want them to if I just come up with a smart plan. And it's, they're right. It's like,
and yeah, they try to do it to themselves or to each other so hard that they both bribe their marriage counselor to tell the other one that the other one's wrong. And it's like, you want to talk about ethical. What are you doing?
Yeah. Very true. Very true. All right. I think that kind of goes through most of our outline. Was there anything else you wanted to touch on and talk about this show?
No, I think we covered a heck of a lot. And then I want you have to watch the show, because even all that we just talked about is just scratching the surface.
Yeah. I think this is we're getting into binge land now. Is that we're not going to be getting much new content. And so I'd say, like, if you haven't seen it, I put Burn Notice to the top of your binge list, but I'd put Ozark pretty high on that list as well. Both very good shows. Ozark definitely in that, if you didn't like Breaking Bad because you want someone to root for, don't watch Ozark. But if you can enjoy that kind of, everyone's terrible, but let's see how they all work it out. Let's see the kind of family drama played against a horrible background. I think this is a great show, and I hope this is kind of giving you some good questions to wrestle with.
Yeah, because if one show has a lot of moral questions, it's this one.
All right. Well, thank you, Ashley, so much. Is there a way that people can follow you or can communicate with you if they have kind of thoughts on this, in terms of, are you on Twitter or places like that?
Sure. You can follow me on Twitter at Ashley Coffin at, I think, just twitter.com. I haven't checked in a while, or electrical_Ash on Instagram.
Awesome. And we'll put links to both those in the show notes. Ashley, thank you again so much for being a part of this. It's been a great conversation.
Thank you so much for having me. This was great.
And to our fans, as always, we want you all in the conversation. So if you're a big fan of Ozark, or if you've just been listening to this and have some thoughts, let us know. Please post on our Superhero Ethics Facebook group. There's also the Facebook page. You can join both of those to kind of follow the conversation. The group, though, is a great place for conversations about it. You can also tweet at us at Superhero Ethics, or email us superheroethics@gmail.com. Links to all of those will be in the show notes. And really, the best thing that you can do, though, more than anything, is we're really trying to grow this audience, get more people involved, get more people in the conversation. So if you like this show, it would mean so much to us if you can go to iTunes, go to wherever you listen, write a review. It helps get more people seeing the show. And also just tell people about it. I know a lot of folks aren't listening to as many podcasts now. Makes total sense. But if you know people who are, post the link to this on your own Facebook or Twitter. Just say, hey, this is a fun thing to check out. I'd love for other people to check it out. We want to get that audience bigger. We want to get more people involved. We want to have a richer conversation with all of you. So Have myself, Ashley, thank you so much. Thank you to all of our fans. Have a great day.
Thanks. Bye.